Hey, this morning we're continuing in our Everyday Kind of Love message series. With this series, we've embarked on a journey together as a church family to reach outside the walls of the church and, in imitation of Jesus, to reach out into our community, to our neighbors, to our family, to our friends, to our coworkers, and to reach out to them with simple, practical expressions of everyday kind of love that we've been observing just in the life and in the ministry of Jesus. Expressions, quickly by way of review, like being fully present with those we engage with, by being kind to those we engage with, by listening well, and by being affirming. And so each week we've been issuing challenges, weekly challenges, for all of us to actually practice these simple and practical expressions of everyday kind of love. And it's been encouraging to hear the stories that you've all been sharing. Well, this morning we have asked Trish Richardson to share her recent experience of just reaching out with everyday kind of love. So welcome, Trish. Woo! You want to hold it? You feel comfortable holding the mic? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I'll just tell you, be careful what you tell the pastors because you might end up
It's true.
If you don't know, my husband and I, Dallas, and I have 9. Picked one out this spring. She got married. So grocery shopping is quite an ordeal for us. I mean, I go every 2 to 3 weeks. It's usually a 4 to 5 hour process because depending how many stops I have, it can be from 4 to 7 stops. And a lot of times, the goal is to get the groceries, get through, get home, and not die, right? And so then I started changing my mindset. God really challenged me. I have the privilege and the opportunity to feed my family well and to, like the Proverbs 31 woman, go out and find from afar sometimes, trying to find, good deals, good food, feed my family well. So that changed that. And then, of course, you can imagine with the situation this spring, when all these only let you have 3 cans of tomato sauce and I need 12, all of a sudden I got to reshift while I'm shopping, recalculating here, and it's just really challenging mentally. In that first time, I really wanted to throw things in my cart, and I'm like, what is up with this? And I started realizing this is a spiritual battle, right? I get to release heaven where I go. I get to shift the atmosphere. So I started seeing this as an assignment, that not only am I trying to get food for my family, but I'm also trying to release the kingdom as I go. And I would say things under my breath. I release peace here. I release shalom, peace and presence. I release the love that casts out all fear, and just keep, just release that when I wasn't thinking about, getting my groceries. And so that became kind of a game in a way, and it was actually very freeing. And then, of course, then we get masks on, so now I can talk to myself and nobody knows, so we're undercover now, undercover agent. So I've loved this series. I didn't get saved until I was 17, and I love where it gets practical down where the rubber meets the road, and I have so loved this series. So a few weeks ago, Sheldon had shared about listening well. And he issued a challenge to us and gave some examples from his own experiences of asking, how are you doing in this season? And to me, that was like, hey, I can take this another step further, right? So I was actually looking forward to grocery shopping because not only was I going to be their undercover agent, releasing the kingdom of God, but I was going to intentionally, I do the self-checkout a lot because I can get through faster, right? It's like, no, I'm going to intentionally go through a checkout so I can talk to people. And most of the time, it didn't go very far, but that was fine. And Sheldon, wherever you are, I appreciate that it's not about performance. In 60 seconds, I did not have to save them or, do some great dissertation on God or anything. I just had to be present, right? And if they didn't engage more, that's fine. I can still pray for them. And so in Owens, I got this young girl, and we're going through, and after I got my stuff up on the bell, I say, hey, how you doing in this crazy season? She says, oh, pretty good. How about you? And I said, well, for not having a normal summer, we've been pretty busy. She said, me too. And it kind of ended there, but then I said, are you headed back to school this fall? And she said, yeah, I'm going back to Bloomington in a couple weeks. And then she said, but my housing fell through at the last minute due to COVID. I said, oh, wow. I said, I'm going to be praying for you. She said, thank you. And she says, I'm sure something will work out. I said, I'm sure it will too. And my time was done, and I wanted to be sensitive that, she has a job to do. But I got her name, and I decided I'm going to pray for her. And literally, as I walked out to my van, I prayed that, God, you would come through for this young lady and give her such a story that she's going to be encouraged that it was you. It's going to be a God story, and it will be a way she can point to him, even as, she tells other people the story, this amazing amazing story. I may never get to see her again, but it was just, I was really grateful for Sheldon giving us that next step that I might not have, I engage with people all the time, but to have a specific thing to open up, and you just never know what it might open up, and you get an opportunity. I wish I could have prayed with her, but like I said, I was trying to be sensitive, not to, get her in trouble or anything like that. So just take it, go the next level, whatever that is for you, because it really is fun. It's fun when you realize, hey, I don't have to perform. I just release heaven and just engage with people and just share the kingdom just by being friendly and just ask them how they're doing.
Thanks, Trish. Yeah, that is so exciting. A lot of stories like that. Last week we talked about affirming people. I had an opportunity at a grocery store this week. I'm walking down the snack food aisle. Not that I was buying anything there. I was just passing through. And this little guy, he's like 4 years old, give or take. He's like, excuse me, mister, excuse me, mister, can you help me reach? And he points to a bag of potato chips that's far out of his reach. And, excuse me, mister, can you help me reach those, please? I'm blown away. So it's like, yeah. And so I get him, thank you. He goes around the corner, and I'm just like amazed. So go around the corner and run into a little guy and his mom. And he's like, Mom, that's the guy who helped me get the potato chips. And so I said, ma'am, you have the most extraordinarily polite young man. And honestly, I wasn't even trying to do the affirmation thing. It was just so natural to see the value in this little guy and to call it out with him right there and Mom there and both of them. You can just tell it changed the atmosphere just a little bit for them. So let's just keep stepping out in these weekly challenges and see, as Trish said, in big ways and small ways, the kingdom of God come through our simple everyday acts of love. So I want to drill down a little bit more into affirmation this week. We saw that the gift of affirmation is really one of the ways that we can, like Jesus, demonstrate the everyday kind of love to the people around us. And affirming others, we saw last week in the middle of your screen, to affirm is to validate, to confirm, to support the value of something or someone. So to confirm the value in the people we engage with. And we tracked with Jesus through a couple gospel scenarios last week and saw how he aimed strength at individuals. He aimed value at them when he encountered them. And so just quickly, two of the individuals we saw Jesus engage with were the royal official and Simon the Zealot. And if you remember well, the royal official was just simply a privileged bureaucrat, to kind of put it in modern day technology or terminology. All right, so it might help you this morning just to think of the royal official as someone who would be on the other side of your political aisle. Does that help contextualize the royal official for you? Who's on the other side of your political aisle? And the zealots were the Antifa of Jesus' day. I'm not making that up. These were social radicals who were committed to the violent overthrow of the government. But in spite of the way that these individuals would have been devalued by their society, or at least devalued by segments of their society, Jesus interacted with them, he engaged with them, he took notice of them, and he called value. He affirmed the value in these individuals. He healed the royal official's sick and dying son, and he called Simon, the Antifa zealot, to follow him. And if you read the lists in the Bible, Simon the Zealot was one of the 12. He was one of the big 12. And just as an interesting footnote here, Church history, church tradition records that Simon the Zealot went on to travel out throughout the Middle East. There are differing traditions that seem to point to somebody who might be Simon the Zealot. One of them says he traveled north into what would be modern-day Georgia. Some traditions say, no, he actually traveled south into modern-day, what would be modern-day Egypt. But all traditions are consistent in this, that he gave his life sharing about what Jesus did for him. And one of the traditions is he actually was sawn in half because of his faith in Jesus Christ. That's Simon the Zealot, a social radical committed to violent protesting in the streets of the cities. Jesus saw value in him, called it out of him, and this social radical became a Jesus radical and gave his life. Instead of taking life or destroying, he gave his life to rescue the people around him. I think that's a pretty cool footnote for people that we might tend to write off, right, as worthless dregs of society. Jesus affirmed them. He saw value in them. But so the question then that was raised last week when we considered Jesus' example of affirming a politician of all people or affirming a terrorist of all people is this: how do we affirm somebody when we completely disagree with them? Right? Isn't that a practical issue? How do I affirm another person? How do I call value out of them when I disagree with their point of view? How do I call value out of another person if I disagree with their approach to bringing about social change? How do I affirm the value of somebody when I disagree completely with their politics? How do I affirm the value in somebody if I disagree with what they post on social media? How do I affirm another person if I disagree with their lifestyle? These are all just strictly hypothetical situations, right? Nothing real about these? Right, I'm being sarcastic. You do get that I'm being sarcastic, right? This is real life for the followers of Jesus right now. How do we affirm value in somebody when we completely disagree with them? And so to make this sermon a little bit more practical for you, think about your royal official. Think about your Simon the Zealot, that person in your sphere of influence that you just absolutely disagree with them. How do you affirm value in that individual? You got somebody in mind? Okay, I can wait until you got somebody in mind. We good now? Okay, I thought so. All right, there are several practical tips that we can learn from Jesus' example of affirming others even when we disagree with them. And so, first of all, this is just simple nuts and bolts kinds of stuff. You can differentiate between the person and the issue. How do we affirm them when we disagree? Differentiate between the person and the issue. And so let me simply explain. Whenever we disagree with somebody, there are two simultaneous objects in the disagreement. There's the person in the disagreement, right? And then there's the issue about which we're disagreeing. Make sense? Two separate issues. And it's very important and it's helpful that we clearly and carefully distinguish between the person and the issue. And no matter what the issue is, no matter what the point of disagreement is, no matter how intense that disagreement is, we can still value the person in the disagreement, though we disagree with the issue. Does that make sense? We need to clearly and carefully distinguish between the two. And we see Jesus doing this very thing with the rich young ruler in Mark chapter 10. Let's just read this. So here's the rich young ruler. As Jesus was starting out on his way to Jerusalem, a man came running up to him, knelt down and asked, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "Why do you call me good?" Jesus asked. "Only God is truly good." That's another sermon for another time. But to answer your question, you know the commandments. And Jesus sort of does this bullet point summary of kind of the whole left side of the book. So you must not murder. You must not commit adultery. And now he starts focusing in on issues. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely. You must not cheat anyone. Honor your father and mother. The rich young ruler says, "Teacher, I've obeyed all these commandments since I was young. And looking at the man, look at this, Jesus felt genuine love for him. That's the side, right? But there's still one thing you haven't done, Jesus told him. Go and sell all your possessions and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. At this, the man's face fell, and he went away sad, for he had many possessions. And so we see here in Jesus' example in Mark 10, clear differentiation between the two objects. We have the person in the issue, right? Namely the rich young ruler. And then we have the issue in the disagreement itself, namely the fact that material wealth and stuff clearly meant too much to the rich young ruler. And Jesus differentiated between the two. We're told that Jesus looked at this guy and he felt genuine love for him. And then immediately afterwards, we're told, Jesus said, he pressed into the issue, right? Well, let's get to the heart of the issue. There's one thing you haven't done. You haven't released your grip on your stuff. And the man went away sad. All right, so you see how Jesus did both. He valued the person and he still addressed the issue. And so in some circles it's called the and stance. We should have that, the and stance. Let's say that together. The and stance. The and stance is demonstrating concern for the person and demonstrating concern for the issue itself. And the and stance is a key ingredient to affirming a person with whom we completely disagree. This is a key ingredient to affirm somebody with whom we completely disagree. Here's the problem. The and stance is not natural for most of us. It's not easy for most of us. And the and stance is not easy because it requires effort. And it requires intentional, nuanced thinking. Most of us tend towards either or. Not both and, but either or thinking, either or stances when we disagree with somebody. That is, we either take a stand for either the person or we take a stand for the issue. Is it making sense? It's either or. We struggle to do both. And I think that our most common tendency, our most common either or stance is taking a stand for the issue against the person, attacking the person. Well, of course you think the way you do because you're a moron. No, I just was looking in your general direction, Jason. I wasn't. Isn't that what we do? Well, of course you think stupid thoughts. You're an idiot. Right? That's like our knee-jerk reaction for many of us when we're in a disagreement. When we disagree with somebody over an issue, when we disagree over the issue, we devalue the person. And so if we were Jesus in Mark chapter 10, we would have said something like this to the rich young ruler. You see yourself as a keeper of the commandments for real? What a joke. You're a greedy pig, you moron. Right? It's all about the issue, and we sacrifice the person for the issue. Nuke the person, win the fight. Right? Isn't that the entire complexion, the contour of political debate in the United States of America? Nuke the person, win the fight. And that's just becoming dialogue, and that's why nobody's listening to anybody anymore. Everybody's attacking, and nothing productive is happening. Right? We take a stand for issues at the expense of people. And I think it should be clear that when we nuke the person simply to win the fight, how that devalues people, right? I'm right, you're an idiot. Do you kind of see, it's hard to see how that devalues somebody when you call them an idiot? Okay, you understand I'm being sarcastic again. All right, so that's one either or stance. I'm going to take a stance for the issue. I'm going to nuke the person. On the flip side of the either or coin is this, that we will accommodate the person at the expense of the issue. And so it'll sound like something like this. Oh, son, it really doesn't matter that you stole candy from the store. The important thing is you know how much I love you. Right? We accommodate the person and we sweep the issue under the carpet. We're so concerned about safeguarding the person and their feelings and safeguarding our relationship with them that we completely ignore the issue. We're a people pleaser, an issue sweeper. And this is really an unhelpful approach. If we are that, we might call that the accommodator kind of person. If we're an accommodator kind of person and we had showed up in Mark chapter 10, we would have said something like this. Oh, all right, greedy heart, schmeedy heart, can't we all just get along here? All right? So, and though I think the stance for those of us who employ this, it feels like it's the nicest and the most loving way to navigate disagreement. It's not, because first of all, some issues matter. Some issues matter. Probably fewer issues than we pick fights over, but some of them actually do matter and ought not be dismissed. But secondly, if you are this kind of accommodator that kowtows to the relationship and sweeps the issues under the carpet, you'll probably recognize that you often feel like you're a doormat, right? You let people walk all over things that are important to you, and you often find yourself growing resentful because the issues go unaddressed. You know what I'm saying? All right, and so again, that's not what Jesus did. Jesus differentiated between the person and the issue, and he took this and stance. We see it right in Mark 10. He affirmed the person. He felt genuine love for the rich young ruler, and yet he still had a hard conversation about his love of stuff. Both and. And the and stance, you got to get this. The and stance is a key ingredient of affirming others when you disagree with them. Now, just in case some of you are thinking, this is just warmed over pop psychology, let's look at the words of Ephesians 4:15. So instead, meaning instead of some really poor choices, that's what it's talking about in the previous verses, so instead, we will hold to the truth. How? In love. We will hold to the truth in love, becoming more and more in every way like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. And so think about this. The Christian who is becoming more and more like Jesus, the Christian who is growing up, the Christian who is maturing, that maturity is evidenced by what? It's really the end stance. To be able to take a stand for issues, that's holding on to the truth, and doing it how? I need to hear that you're clear on that. In love. Don't miss this. Ephesians 4:15 is telling us that Christian maturity is evidenced in our ability to differentiate between people and issues and to demonstrate value for the people and still take a stance for the issues. That's the truth part, right? Simple enough. This is our first point. Even when we disagree then with another person's perspective, we can still differentiate between them and the issue, and we can still call value out of that individual. See value in them. It's hard to do, but we can do it because Jesus did it. And his Holy Spirit empowers us to look more and more like Jesus in the way we show everyday kind of love to those around us. And so just very quickly, I want to just show two more ways then, practical ways that we can affirm the person even when we disagree with them about the issue. And so first of all, we can validate the person's thoughts. We can validate their thinking. So think about this. What kind of things do we typically say to a person when we disagree with their thoughts? Right? We're having an argument, we're coming at it from different directions, and we will often respond to their rationale with a statement, something to this effect. Wow, that is so stupid. Right? I could totally see how you would have that point of view if you're a complete idiot. You have no common sense, right? Isn't that the kind of thing we say? Maybe not so directly. Some of us, maybe so. But others maybe a little bit more subtle. And again, we are, in effect, devaluing the person by essentially attacking them. Because when we tell somebody that their thoughts are stupid, we're just essentially telling them that they're stupid. You think stupid thoughts because you're a stupid person. Right? So listen to this. This is hard for many of us to hear. Even when we disagree with another person about an issue, we can still validate their thoughts. We can still do it by saying something like, I can understand what you're saying. Right? It makes sense to me. What you're saying makes sense to me. I can see your perspective. We can say those sorts of things to people even when we disagree with them. And it even is helpful for us to actually make an effort to see why their perspective makes sense to them. And even if I still completely disagree with their perspective, it's a simple thing to say, I can see how you're seeing it. Does that make sense? How many of you are saying, oh boy, I don't know if I can do that, or you're just thinking right now, I ain't going to do it. Just try it. Try it. Right? Validating a person's thoughts is a simple and practical way to affirm them as a person and at the same time, honestly, to move the conversation about the issue forward. All right? Because when we just tell people that we disagree with their perspective or their thoughts or their ideas, because they're stupid thoughts, idiotic thoughts, all right, what does that do to conversation about the issue? I don't think I said that very well. When we just attack them, that's stupid. How could you think that? How could you hold that political perspective? How could you hold that social justice perspective? How could you hold that perspective about racial issues? You're an idiot. Where does the dialogue proceed forward from there? Right? It doesn't. It just degenerates into personal attack, and constructive dialogue about the issue shuts down. But when you actually say to somebody, even when you disagree with them, I can see how that makes sense, given your perspective. It makes sense to me. Why that makes sense to you? The person feels affirmed. They feel value that, okay, I'm not a blooming idiot. And then there's room to dialogue because you haven't attacked them as an individual. Does that make sense? So we can differentiate between the person, we can differentiate between the issue, still affirm the person, take a stand for the issue, and affirm the person by just validating their thoughts. All right, so the first simple practical application. Second one then is you can empathize with the person's feelings. You can empathize with a person's feelings. Again, when we're in a disagreement with somebody, and whether it's out there or whether it's with your spouse, and they say something to the effect of, well, when you did that, it really made me feel fill in the blank, hurt, feel sad, feel whatever. What is the kind of thing that we typically say? Well, you shouldn't feel that way. It's stupid for you to feel that way. Right? Men, how does that work? Does that encourage dialogue about the issue, or does that shut it down? right? When we devalue the person's feelings, right, even though we might be right. I was going to say it. Maybe they shouldn't feel that way. No, we can't put shoulds and oughts on feelings. They are what they are. But when we shut them down, it shuts everything down. But even when we disagree with a person, we can still validate the other person's feelings. We can empathize with the other person's feelings by saying something simple like this. I can imagine that you might be feeling hurt. Right? I can imagine that really hurt. I can see how that would have made you angry. It makes sense to me. That must have been, right? Aren't those simple things to say? Even when we disagree. It makes sense to me. We validate their thoughts. And I can see how that would make you feel hurt. And if I could delve a little bit into headline politics, and so when we're observing what's happening in the streets of our cities, where there is difficult things that are going on from every perspective. Understand what I'm saying? And it's hard for us to take an and stance in our evaluation of their issues. But if we can say to the person with whom we disagree, because they're looking at those issues from a completely different perspective, we can still value the person by saying to them, you know what? The way you're seeing things makes sense to me. I get it. And I can understand why it makes you angry. Back of my head, I can still be saying, I completely disagree. I think you've got the wrong end of the stick, or I think you don't have the whole picture. Right? But I don't need to introduce that. At least not then and there. I can still say to the person, it makes sense to me. I get it, and I can see why you feel the way you do. And once we've built that safe space for them, remember we talked about creating a safe space for people to get real with us, because that's what God does for us. He creates a safe space for us to get real with him. Then we have grounds of trust where we can have constructive conversation. Is that making sense? All right, so let's wrap up. Have the worship team come forward. I'm kind of digressing here. I have no idea where I am anymore. So how do we affirm the value in those we engage with when we completely disagree with their perspective? We have to differentiate between the person and the issue with which we disagree. And we must, because it's what Jesus did. We demonstrate value. We demonstrate genuine love for the individual. And when the issues are important, we still take a stand for the issue. But we can demonstrate value for the other person by validating their thoughts and by empathizing with their feelings. Make sense? All right, simple enough. So this week, the weekly challenge is let's go do that. So if you find yourself in a conversation and you are on the other side of whatever the aisle is with that person, differentiate between the person and the issue. Right? Validate the person. Listen to their perspective and just try saying to them, what you're saying makes sense. And I can see how you feel